Hello, this is Clay Whitaker, and I am the director of the CPAT program here at the Gibson Center. And welcome to this video of one of my absolute favorite performances. I've been dying to finally upload this video. I think this is one of my favorites because it's one of the most impressive performances, and I'll explain why here in a moment. But it is a great video, I think, for educational and learning purposes. I think it's going to be great especially for first-time candidates who are looking at the possibilities of the test. Why is this one of my favorites? Well, first, she currently holds the distinction of being the smallest candidate to pass the CPAT at our facility. At the time of this test, she was 5'3", 114 pounds. That is very impressive. Second, this video is a wonderful illustration of perseverance and preparation. This was, I believe, her fourth or fifth attempt at passing the test, so she obviously worked very hard to achieve this, and she obviously put in a lot of physical prep for the test. And that's proof in her walking time average, which was excellent. It was in the 16s, and she was able to push through the hardest parts of the test for her, which were the stair climb, event 1, event 5 there at forcible entry, and then the dummy drag there at event 7. A third, she made several relatively easy to prepare for mistakes, which I think are good for learning purposes for subsequent candidates. And I'll chime in later in the video at these points to briefly discuss them, because I think they're relatively easy to fix and to prepare for, but I think they're relatively easy to avoid. So be on the lookout in the later video for the on-air icon to hear this audio commentary, and I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. But anyway, I hope any candidates watching find this video helpful and informative. Okay, let me discuss briefly the rule regarding the pathway turn cones. Whenever there is a turn on pathway lines in the CPAT, a cone has to be placed by the proctor staff. And the number of cones will vary from facility to facility. It will depend on how many turns exist on a given course. Even though all the variables are the same, each course is going to be slightly different just based on the building in which that particular course sits. Anyway, regardless of which facility, whenever a CPAT candidate comes to a cone on a pathway, the candidate must go around it because it denotes a turn. If the candidate does not, as you will see in just a moment, the candidate will be redirected to go back and around the missed cone. So just FYI, there is no limit on how many cones a candidate can attempt to skip. The downside to cutting in front of a cone is that it can cost precious seconds. So if you're really close, this is a mistake that might prove more costly than you might think. But by the time a candidate gets this far in the test, she's almost to the end. They're probably experiencing mental as well as physical fatigue. So they will probably be slower to hear, comprehend, and react to the command of the proctor. So typically it's a bigger mistake than one might think. In this instance, this mistake cost her about 5 seconds. Now the good news about missing a cone, it doesn't happen all that much, so that's the good news. And just remember to be mindful about this rule because it should be easy to follow and should hopefully be an easy mistake to avoid. Now the silver lining of this mistake for this particular candidate, it sparked her to pick up her pace on the walking path to the next event. Take note, her best walk time was immediately after this, so some good did come from it. Okay, let me stop right here and discuss the beginning of Event 7. And again, just for FYI for first-time test takers, a typical assessment from candidates at our facility is that they consider this event the second worst of the test. Obviously behind the stair mill, because by this time candidates are pretty winded, you're almost near the end of the test, and suddenly that 165-pound dummy feels a little heavier than they might have anticipated. Anyway, this candidate, in my opinion, did really well in this event, especially considering her size relative to the mannequin. But what I want to highlight briefly here is the time she spent from the moment of touching the harness to taking her first step. It took about 8 seconds. And she was trying to decide how best to grip the harness handles. Not to say she made a mistake here, she was trying to establish a grip on a mannequin that outweighs her by over 50 pounds. So it's not to say that that was necessarily bad time management, because this isn't the easiest event for most candidates, let alone a candidate giving up that much weight. But my suggestion for smaller candidates or those who might be a bit concerned for overall time management during the test is during your orientation walkthrough, hopefully at your testing site you are given the opportunity to handle all of the CPAT equipment. But during that time, try to figure out your choreography for the event. And by that, I mean determine how you're going to grip the harness, such as are you going to use one-handed grip or two? Are you going to choke up on the harness? And regardless of what you're going to do, it's probably a good idea to ask questions to the proctor staff at that facility and what they will and will not allow, so that you know before the test whether or not what you want to use is actually going to be allowed. But anyway, by determining event choreography before the test, hopefully you will already know how you want to complete this task and hopefully save yourself a few seconds. This will be the final audio comment of this particular video, and let me pause here just after the candidate has successfully completed her third set. So far, she's performed well on this event. She hasn't had any missed reps. She hasn't had any foot warnings. She's done really well. All she needs to do is complete her last set, and she's done. However, as you will see, she is going to make a mental mistake. After she completes her third set, she stops as she thinks she has completed the test. But remember, 4 completed sets are required to finish this event. She has either lost track of how many sets she has completed, or she has forgotten how many sets are required to finish. I think it's more likely she's just simply lost track of the number of sets. Regardless of the why, this type of mistake, when a candidate thinks they are done, when in fact they are not, could be very problematic, because if the candidate steps out of the cage and both feet step beyond the boundaries of the frame, the test is over. Remember, a candidate only gets 1 warning for stepping outside the cage. If that were to happen, I guarantee you the candidate is going to be very frustrated and even angrier about this mistake, because you got to this point and you're in position to pass and you make a very avoidable mistake. That's going to be a hard result to accept. Another problem with this type of mistake is the time that's lost, and having to reposition the pole takes longer than you might think, because by this time, especially if the time is dwindling down, the candidate is going to be mentally and physically exhausted. Now in this instance, it cost her about 5 seconds, and she did a pretty good job of minimizing the time loss, especially considering how fatigued she was. She reacted pretty quickly and got repositioned fairly quickly. So this example is a good illustration of the importance of keeping track of reps and sets. The proctor should be yelling out the reps, but you may not hear them, so it's probably a good idea to keep track of the reps and sets yourself. Luckily, in this case, this mistake wasn't fatal to her overall test performance, as she didn't step outside the frame, and the 5 seconds she lost during her reposition didn't cause her to time out either.